In an age oversaturated with superhero content, it is surprising that there aren't many superhero games, at least not many good ones. In addition to this, most superhero media, especially now, rarely tend to focus on issues of morality, which I think is important to superhero stories.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Infamous is all about morality. Now, I've watched a couple of reviews of this game, and one common complaint is that the morality system is rather shallow. I'm inclined to agree, at least from a player choice standpoint. There is significant dissonance between the way the game was marketed and the actual game itself. I do love this game, but I think Infamous is a terrible title for it, at least as far as actually conveying what the game is about. The title, Infamous, is named after the rank that you achieve when you become as evil as possible. I've mentioned in other videos that in the early 2000s, the idea of the deal with the devil was heavily prevalent in pop culture. Because of this, I think they overemphasized the fact that you can be evil, in order to make the game seem more edgy. You absolutely can play as evil in Infamous, but it is objectively a subpar experience to playing as a good guy, at least as far as the story goes. There is some ludonarrative dissonance if you play as evil. Your immersion will be broken if you play as an evil character, because some missions will still assume that you care about rescuing people. For example, one mission has you clear the train tracks and restore power so that the trains can function in the city. Since this is a good deed, if you play as an evil character, in the cutscene, Cole shoots a pedestrian with lightning, literally just to show that he's evil.
Ungrateful bastards. Decided to fry one of them, send a signal that I wasn't to be crossed. It's a lesson they won't soon forget.
Now, perhaps this would be convincing if he was someone like Klaus Michelson, who wants to be feared yet respected, and would do an action like this for a display of power. However, it's a rather understated move for a homicidal maniac who just spent 20 minutes roaming around the city, showing off his unlimited power to dozens of civilians. Say what you want about evil Cole McGrath, at least he made the trains run on time. But no, the intended experience is clearly to play as a hero. Let's drop the marketing and view Infamous for what it actually is, rather than what it could have been. The game starts with a peaceful, serene title screen. And then... yes, you ignite the events of the story. This is so genius, I can't praise it enough. It captures your interest instantly. You are then in the middle of an explosion site. Cole McGrath has unintentionally detonated a bomb, which killed others, but gave himself superpowers. And here there is another genius game design moment. The game tells you to point the camera up to look at a helicopter, but it does not tell you how. So whether you point the right analog stick up or down, it'll decide based on that whether to invert the controls or not. Instead of having a boring box of text pop up and interrupt the gameplay, asking you whether you want normal or inverted controls, Infamous allows you, the player, to decide intuitively without the player even being aware that they have made a choice. You are then introduced to Zeke, Cole's best friend, and Trish, Cole's love interest. What's interesting is that Zeke is not a very moral character. He's quite childish, and seems content to watch TV and drink beer. And when he discovers that Cole has superpowers, he is more concerned about how cool it is, and the perks that come with being a superhero, rather than anything noble or heroic. And yet, he is fairly likable. By contrast, Trish is highly moralistic, in fact, too much so. She cannot forgive Cole, despite the fact that Cole wasn't responsible for the explosion. And no matter what Cole does to help, she kind of just takes it for granted, like it is the least that Cole could possibly do. I'll be honest, I find Trish rather unlikable, and I'm not sure how intentional story-wise that is. However, she is by all intents and purposes a good and moral person. These two characters present a sort of moral compass for Cole. They are like the angel and devil on his shoulders. From here on out, there will be spoilers. Just a heads up. As mentioned previously, the morality system is rather shallow, the way it's implemented. It is very black and white. There is no moral ambiguity whatsoever. The choice is always blatantly good or laughably evil.
Shoot the tank now. Use it to blow off the golem's arm. That'd make my life easier. But the explosion will incinerate all of those injured people.
There is one interesting choice, however. The villain, Kessler, has 8 doctors hanging from one roof and Trish from another. You have a choice. The good choice, or at least the good choice from a utilitarian point of view, which is to save the doctors. 8 lives are greater than 1 life, and 8 doctors could potentially save dozens if not hundreds of other lives. Or the evil choice, being selfish and saving Trish. However, Kessler is screwing with you, so no matter what choice you make, Trish dies anyway. The only difference is what Trish's final words are. I gotta say, this blew me away the first time I played the game. This is essentially the infamous...
He said it! He said it!
This is essentially the infamous trolley problem.
Trouble with the trolley, eh?
And I have seen this before in superhero media. In the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, the Green Goblin provides a similar ultimatum. However, in that instance, they completely cop out and Spider-Man ends up saving both the people as well as Mary Jane. I remember feeling cheated somewhat watching that because Spider-Man never actually had to make the difficult choice. However, Infamous not only had the balls to make you choose, but also to kill off the love interest. And it was at this moment that I knew I was playing a great game. From this point on, Cole is dead set on revenge, wanting Kessler dead. I will mention here that the story is rather convoluted. There are other characters like Sasha and Alden, who I'm not even going to bother discussing, since the game couldn't even be bothered to explain them, or finish their stories. You battle both of them in boss fights, but both of them survive, yet never reappear in the game again. Apparently, you have to read some comic to find out what happens to them, and I just don't care enough to do that. I am generally not a fan of needing supplemental material to understand a story. The narrative is absolutely a mess, I'll admit that. Nothing's perfect, and I know it sounds like I'm trashing the very game that I'm trying to praise, but I'm just being honest and thorough in my assessment. So, why is this a great game then, and why do I enjoy it? Well, let's start with the gameplay. Infamous is ultimately a third-person shooter. You may not be able to use guns, however, your arsenal is equivalent to what you would have in other third-person shooters, such as Uncharted. Bolts are bullets, shock grenades are, well, grenades, and your electric rockets are basically missiles. Infamous is far superior to Uncharted, however. In Uncharted, there are sections where you climb around on ledges. Unfortunately, these are extremely scripted events, rather boring, and rarely involve combat, with a few exceptions. Infamous, on the other hand, uses the ledge climbing mechanic in conjunction with the combat, which makes both activities more engaging. Instead of relying on cover, where you simply have to wait for an opening, here you use the verticality of the buildings to flank your enemies and get the high ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
This literally makes the gameplay more three-dimensional than Uncharted. The open world is also a step up. Instead of linear level design, you can explore the city at your leisure, and the missions take place within this open environment. The only exception are the sewer sections. The sewer areas are essentially glorified tutorials, but they are well designed. This is the only game that I've known that makes tutorials fun, so add that to my list of praises. Again, instead of having a box telling you how to use a new ability, you get a new power, are given a linear sewer level where you have to use the ability to complete it, and then you restore power to an area of the city. So these sections are also keys to unlocking more of the map. The sewers are also full of water, which is Cole's kryptonite. Worst weakness ever, by the way. He would be the easiest superhero to kill in real life, but it makes the sewers more hazardous to Cole. So these levels are made into platforming areas. And you can also electrify the water to kill any enemies that decide to take a swim. I cannot overstate how well these function for tutorials. Anyway, the reason that Cole has superpowers is because he is a conduit, which is this game's term for people with superpowers, being a conduit of the energy that he absorbed during the blast. Cole is far from the only one, however. Many of the enemies in the game are also conduits. They can teleport, turn invisible, and even generate yellow tektites made of scrap metal. What? These foes also add an extra dimension to the combat. This also makes each area distinct, as the 3 islands have different enemies. There's the Neon, which is bright and vibrant. The enemies here are also bright and vibrant, making them easy to spot. The Warren is the ghetto area, much less vibrant and much more trashy, literally. Then, there's the Historic District, which has older buildings, some with an Art Deco aesthetic. This game is extremely gray. I know this is a complaint to some, but it really evokes the bleak, downtrodden aesthetic of this dystopic landscape. I should also mention that after the explosion, the government put the islands under quarantine. An agent, Moya, promises Cole his freedom if he goes along with her plan. Zeke is skeptical of this, to say the least. He believes that there is a government cover-up going on, and that Moya is going to betray him. Cole brushes this off as tinfoil hat conspiracy theories at first, but lo and behold, Zeke turns out to be correct. There is even a mission where the bad guys kidnap some civilians and put them on boats, assuming that the government won't shoot down boats with innocent people on board. Moya straight up tells Cole that they will sink the boats regardless, so he might as well just rescue them himself. The government agency plans on killing anyone who leaves the island, and is most likely planning on bombing the islands to cover up what happened. There are also television sets spread throughout the open world, in which you can see propaganda being played. The news media blatantly lies about what is happening, describing people trying to escape the island as terrorists trying to spread the plague.
Shocking news tonight of a callous and unprovoked attack by terrorists seeking to break through the quarantine and cross Stampton Bridge. Their goal was simple: spread the plague to the mainland. It was only because of the efforts of the heroic men and women of the CDC that this vicious attack was repelled, thus preserving the quarantine.
There is also a rogue hacker, a sort of post-apocalypse Russell Brand type of character, who provides a sort of counter-narrative to the media. But he also paints Cole as some Antichrist type figure, so neither narrative are really helping out Cole. They are all spreading lies about him and his situation.
Man, this crap keeps getting better and better. The first light bulb man blew most of our city back to the Stone Age, and now he's running around destroying water towers. Yeah, you heard me right. He's hell-bent on cutting off our supply of fresh water. And I know some of you think this lunatic's a hero, but take it from me, he's not. I've seen him in action. He trashes cars for the hell of it and fries innocent people when they get in his way. Does that sound like a hero to you? I'm out.
The hacker also gets taken out by the feds later in the game, and there is a theory that he is just a puppet used to discredit Cole, a form of controlled opposition.
Live. More information's coming in on the damn CDC thugs and the jackbooted bastards. It's only a matter of time before they... Hey! Stay away from me! I did what are you doing? Stay away from what you said, I told you! Stay away from I did what you said, I told you!
I should mention that this is all optional content. There's an entire story arc here that can be completely ignored by the player. This is very strong world building. Potentially, you could not pay attention to the TVs at all, or the player could be very confused by all the misinformation. The player might take the news or the hacker at face value at first, given either their trusting or contrarian natures. I think this whole aspect of Infamous has aged rather well. You hear lots of talk about misinformation these days, whether from our mainstream media or the Alex Joneses of the world. There's such an oversaturation of info that it can be easy to fall into the trap of just believing the status quo wholeheartedly for some sense of stability, or by believing in the exact opposite out of a form of protest, or by just succumbing to nihilism and believing in nothing at all whatsoever. For a game from 2009, it was ahead of the curve, maybe a bit too ahead, as in 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
After weeks of around-the-clock research, the CDC just announced that it has developed a cure for the Empire City Plague. Side effects are said to be quite mild, and the vaccine has a 99% success rate. Officials went on to say the distribution of the cure, administered by a single shot, will begin tomorrow. The hope is that the quarantine will be lifted within 1 to 2 weeks.
Maybe Infamous itself is just a work of predictive programming. If that is the case, then I guess I'm just an MKUltra victim, and at that point I might as well declare my love for Big Brother, but hopefully that is not the case. Anyways, that got rather dark.
Yes, that would be dark.
I guess I better talk about more gameplay. There are plenty of side missions. Some of them are rather fun. I like the ones where the enemy factions fight one another. It shows that these enemies don't solely exist to murder Cole, but actually engage in turf wars with each other. I also enjoy the ones where you have to destroy surveillance devices on buildings. It turns the ledge climbing into a puzzle, and it is a nice break from combat. However, many of the side missions are filler and quite boring, such as the photographer missions, which are really just refresher tutorials, and the stealth missions, where you follow a courier who turns into a suicide bomber if he sees you. These are tedious and I don't care for them. The boss fights in Infamous are alright. Sasha is a very generic fight, even involving QuickTime events. Tap quickly would definitely tap quickly.
Dear sweet Sasha.
Alden is much better. It is no Ornstein and Smo by any means, but it requires great timing and energy management.
You think you can hurt me? Nothing can compare with what I've endured. But I survived. You and Kessler are one and the same!
Kessler's fight is the most dynamic, but also the most unforgiving. They don't hold any punches. If it weren't for the checkpoints, this would be harder than Dark Souls, especially on the highest difficulty. Kessler really tests your skills, and this fits the story too, as we'll get to. I also like how the boss arena is the very explosion site where the game began. It all comes full circle. There's lots of great set pieces as well. There is a maze made out of shipping containers, a giant tower in the middle of the second island, and the trains are quite useful for getting around. You can also ride the rails too. Although you must be careful. I've lost track of how many times I've gotten hit by these damn trains. Self-inflicted death is also really common in Infamous. The shock grenades are pretty overpowered, so it is easy to use them as a crutch. However, they not only damage your enemies, they also damage you. Don't spam grenades, or you will die repeatedly, and it will all be your fault.
And it will all be your fault.
You can reduce your chance of death, however, by leveling up. You can buy upgrades that increase your damage output, decrease how much damage you take, and increase your healing ability. You heal by sucking electricity out of things, by the way. There are also challenges you can do if you are a completionist, such as this one, called Ride the Lightning. There is also a side mission called Alden in Chains, so there were definitely some metalheads who worked on this game. I would like to discuss the twist ending, as it really elevates Infamous to a new level. The twist is that Kessler is actually Cole from the future.
My brain lurched, unable to accept that Kessler and I were the same person. That he'd come back in time to mold me into the savior he failed to be.
And I know, when I heard this for the first time, I didn't know what to make of it. It initially seems like one of those 4D chess anime character moments that makes no coherent sense whatsoever. Then again, this is a comic book themed video game, even using comic book panels for cutscenes, so that's not too out of place. Even though I had a bit of a chuckle at what I assumed was just ham-fisted writing when I first saw the credits roll, ending my first playthrough of Infamous, each playthrough since then, I love this twist more and more. Kessler talks to you throughout the game, so once you know the twist, it adds another layer to these conversations.
Real tough guy, aren't you?
On the contrary, I'm weak. Quite weak, in fact. Which is why you need to learn this lesson, and learn it well. Everyone has their breaking point. What separates the strong from the weak is the ability to take the beating. Hell, to love the beating. No matter how great the pain, never wavering from what needs to be done. Think you can remember that?
Screw you.
Kessler knew of a coming threat called the Beast. Yet, he cowardly fled and let it destroy everything. He gained the ability to make a one-way trip back in time. He used this opportunity to harden his past self so that Cole would not become the coward that he was, and would be strong enough to take on the Beast. He orchestrated everything. He made Cole a social pariah. He made Cole detonate the bomb. Kessler even murdered Trish, who he himself loved as much as Cole did, just so that Cole would not be weakened by his attachment. This is the real moral question that Infamous poses, even if it does so indirectly. That being, Infamous doesn't test your ability to make the right choice during morally ambiguous moments. The moments are rather black and white. Instead, it tests your commitment to being good. If you chose to let Trish die for the greater good, are you any different than Kessler? What grounds can you condemn him on that you can't also condemn yourself? Even playing as a purely good character, you still kill hundreds of people, all to defeat Kessler. Kessler is doing the same thing, just on a larger scale, in order to defeat the Beast. The everyday people view Cole the same way that Cole views Kessler. Is the hacker, Voice of Survival, any less justified in his condemnation of Cole? You could argue that Voice of Survival didn't understand the context that Cole is operating in, but Cole didn't understand the context that Kessler was working under until the end of the game. The government and the mainstream media are also operating under the idea that they are doing the greater good, yet Cole views them as evil. Perhaps the greater good is an oxymoron. There is the famous Winston Churchill quote, "Great and good are seldom the same man." And yes, this is actually in the game. Between missions, sometimes you will see quotes from famous people, often relating to the themes of the game, those themes being power and morality. These include quotes from John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, and Voltaire. This is another fantastic inclusion, which enhances the game. It brings to mind the great man theory, that there are great men who change the course of history. Cole has the weight of the world on his shoulders, but as another quote in the game says, Atlas was permitted the opinion that he was at liberty, if he wished, to drop the Earth and creep away, but this opinion was all that was permitted. Even when Cole discovers that he was manufactured by Kessler, even when Cole declares that he hates Kessler and kills him, even then, Cole still picks up the mantle that Kessler intended for him.
I hate everything about Kessler, but when the time comes, I will be ready.
Cole awaits in anticipation for his battle with the Beast. His journey has not ended, it has only begun, and he intends to fulfill his destiny. This quote and ending sum up the true message of the game. You are permitted the opinion that you have a choice in Infamous, but this opinion is all that is permitted. In other words, the shallow morality system is a feature, not a bug. This isn't something like The Witcher, where there is gray morality that relies on subjectivity or the renunciation of there being any correct choice whatsoever. In Infamous, it is absolute. The greatest good is defeating the Beast, and the ends justify the means. Even if you take the evil route, the Beast still exists and is on its way. Evil Cole would then only have two options: to defeat the Beast anyway, as good Cole would do, or flee and hide, like Kessler did, and we know how that ended up. The fate is inescapable. Great men are meant for great things, whether they are good or evil. Ultimately, what differs between fame and infamy is based on whose propaganda that you buy into. All great men are infamous. I guess the title is fitting after all. Thank you for watching. If anyone is interested, I will happily review the second Infamous game, which I believe failed to measure up thematically, and essentially ruins everything that the first game sets up. Besides that, however, the first Infamous is still one of my favorite video games of all time, and now you have a good idea why. It might be dated in some respects, feeling more like a PlayStation 2 game than a PlayStation 3 game, but its engaging gameplay and deep themes more than make up for that. Our acculturation continues as we ask ourselves, what's in a meme?